Okay, so we've looked at economic growth, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, what we should be doing for economic growth, and now we're going to tie it all into living standards. So this is the end part of sustainable economic growth, which is a compulsory section of the study design. So very quickly, we all know what living standards are. Material living standards increase the goods and services of each individual, and the easiest way to measure it is income per person, or what we call GDP per capita. This shows us the purchasing power of each individual person living within an economy. But don't forget, because of distribution of income, if it's unevenly distributed, it can be a misleading figure. Think of an island with 10 people, 9 of those earn $100 and the other person earns $9,100. Well, the total income is $10,000, therefore giving an average income of $1,000, but we already know that 9 earn $100. So therefore, it can be a misleading figure, but you know what? It's the one we use for the moment. And we'll discuss alternatives later on when we get towards the end. Non-material living standards, well, these are different indicators. These are more about your quality of life, your more altruistic feelings, the internal things, not just material consumption. All sorts of things we can look at here with non-material relationships, social networks, welfare, health, education, equality, all that sort of thing. And the one thing that stands out most about non-material living standards is they are emotive. They can't really be measured, because what one person considers to make them a better person or make them happy may not be the same for another person next to them. And a real good example is here. Summer 2000, the Canadian government did a study that looking at all the areas of America and Canada, and found out that Prince Edward Island had the lowest form of living standard in the country, and printed that up, that, you know, this has the lowest material living standards. However, she wrote a letter, basically, I won't go through it, and it was pretty much saying, look, you know, I'm very disappointed. I love my place. It's well maintained. We've got glorious. It's safe. It's clean. It's friendly. What a fantastic place to live. And here you are telling me that we have the lowest standard of living, whereas I wouldn't live anywhere else. So while their report may have been material living standards, she's actually based her reply on non-material. So see how the two can be completely different. Okay, and we can have that internally as well. Some people living in high socio-economic suburbs, well, they want to keep updating their car every year, whereas a new car in low socio-economic suburbs once every 10 years may keep them happy. So what factors affect living standards? There are many factors that affect living standards. However, there are 3 specifically mentioned in the study design. These 3 are mentioned, so these are the 3 we'll focus on. Income per capita. Total level of income that is earned in a country divided by the number of people who live in that country. Pretty basic, not overly tricky. Okay, can be misleading, does not consider how the income was distributed throughout the economy, and that's what we said before with the example of the island. And in an equitable society, you can find that even income is high, the assessments of living standards remain low, because again, even on that island, one person may be able to afford a whole heap of stuff, whereas the other 9 can't afford anything. They've only got $100. So they may be able to afford their rent and food, and that's about it. So while we look at it and go, well, aren't they fantastic? They've got an average income of $1,000. 9 of those 10 residents are really way below that. Environmental quality. Well, when discussing environmental quality, we're more likely to be aiming at non-material. You know, are you happy with the air, your health, all that sort of thing. The environment is the basis for all economic activity. It provides everything. That's where we're getting everything. We're getting all our food, our medicines, all of that through the environment. Okay, it impacts on our health. If we may all have massive material living standards because we've all got brand new cars, but you know what? We all may be having pollution problems. And if you've seen pictures of places like Los Angeles, Beijing, places like that that have heaps and heaps of cars, you have seen that they do have pollution problems. So while we can say, yeah, they've got a high level of material living standards, what's the environmental quality of their non-material living standards? The other thing is, we have discussed previously with economic growth. If economic growth is out of control, well, we can all have high material living standards if we've got high economic growth, but are we using our resources way too quickly? And therefore, later on down the track, well, not only if we burned up all our resources, and a good example I've always used is Nauru and their phosphorus. Not only are the material living standards going to be affected, but so can non-material living standards also start to fall. Income distribution, again using my example, we can know that income distribution isn't necessarily right, but we want a more equal form of income distribution. But we also need incentives for people to want to work hard. We want businesses to make as much profit as they possibly can, so they'll keep reinvesting into the economy and also keep hiring people. We want people who are working to work harder, increase their productivity, so in order to get pay rises or things like that. So on the other hand, if the labour market is purely driven by market forces with no protection for low skilled workers, then the gap between high and low can be vast. So you know, a lot of people, you're doing VCE economics, hopefully so you can go to university, get yourself a degree, put yourself at the higher end of the pay scale because you'd be considered a high skilled worker. So, and that's what you're doing it for. If we don't have some form of fairness in our distribution system, that gap between low and high just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If income distribution is inequitable, it can lead to social unrest and disharmony. And if some members of society do not have access to basic goods and services. I remember, some of you may remember last year here in Melbourne, and certainly around the world as well, the Occupy Wall Street people, and we had here in Melbourne where they occupied Treasury Place, the We Are the 99%. That was all based around, those figures come from income distribution. Okay, so they're feeling they're not getting their fair share, so as again, social unrest, things like that. Okay, now, what do we use here in Australia to help with our income distribution? Well, we use a tax system and a welfare system that increases equity. If you can't find work, you know what? The government will supply you money. It's a minimal amount of money, but they will still supply you with stuff. So that I don't believe he's just kicked that goal off the line. Nearly mucked it up. Well, the government will still supply you with some sort of payment so that you can still go out and buy basic goods and services for your family. Okay. The impact of living standards from the degree of income quality is very difficult to measure. Well, we can measure the material, but we can't necessarily measure the non-material, because you know what? You may be a bloke who is living on the beach, not just a bloke, but any person. You may be living on the beach, and you get up in the morning, you throw your fishing line out in the sea, you catch your fish, that's what you eat for the day, and you spend all day sitting on the beach, and you know what? You don't want anything else. Now, we may have other people look at that and go, I'm not real, oh, what low, living standards, and oh, I couldn't handle doing that. But you know what? That person is probably very happy, and their non-material living standards are probably at a very, very high point. They've got the feeling in themselves that, you know what? I don't think life could get any better for me. So always remember that non-material is very, very emotive and hard to measure. Okay, sustainable development is something we also look at. Development needs the present needs without compromising the ability of the future. And for those who remember their efficiency, we're going into intertemporal efficiency. It's starting to tie in a little bit. We're making sure that we're continuing our economic prosperity, short-term and long-term. We're looking after both. It's no use just having short-term prosperity at the expense of long-term prosperity. And again, if you do just a little bit of private research, look at Nauru and phosphorus, the fact that they had short-term prosperity, but basically got mined out, and now they're in trouble, and that's why they've got to accept money for us to put our detention centres there. Okay, so we need to look at that. Ecological economists do question the relentless pursuit of economic growth, because if we keep growing, we've discussed this a number of times in various different subjects, if our economic growth is out of control, well, you know what? We are going to continually burn out our resources over and over and over again. If they can't be sustained, well, then we're going to have problems in the future. Other factors, working conditions, life expectancy. Some areas have a low life expectancy, some areas have high. Working conditions, if you enjoy, you work in office or clean, safe environment, we have OH&S laws here in this country. If you work in a safe environment, you feel better about work. All these sorts of things. You feel happy, you feel safe going to work, you're not worried about all that sorts of things. Life expectancy, all that sort of stuff. Nobody really wants to work to 65 when you consider that, oh, pretty much everyone dies at 65, what's worth it? But if you know what, if our average life expectancy is 75 to 80, that's a pretty fair dig, and I can still enjoy 10 to 15 years of retirement. Okay, now we said that income per capita is one of the ways we measure it. It's not necessarily the best way because it has problems. There are other measures that can be used. There's the Economist Quality of Life Index, the ABS measure of Australia's performance, the GPI, the Genuine Progress Index, and the United Nations Human Development Index. Now, on last year's, that's the 2012 VCE economics paper, there was a question, just one question, on the ABS measure of Australia performance and the GPI, and comparing that to measurements of economic growth. So what I would suggest you do, and I've asked my class to do, guys, is go out, find these. I've given you a worksheet in class about it. Just do a little bit of research about them, know what's good about them, know what's bad about them. You don't have to write massive papers, but just know basically what each one's about and good and bad stuff of it. So just to tie the whole thing up, all of this whole thing with economic growth, sustainable economic growth, expansion of an economy's productive capacity. So the source of economic growth is either more resources or improved technology. And we discussed that right the way back in year 11 and even at the start of this year when we discussed efficiency. Here's our little PP curve right here. We're sitting on here. How do we get out here? We've got the points inside, underutilisation, full utilisation. How do we get out here in any point out here on this line? Well, we've either got to bring in more resources or we need to figure out a way to use our resources better. Okay, so we can move out here if we come up with some sort of system, dynamic efficiency, any sort of type of efficiency, okay? So, and that'll get us to move out here. Economic growth targets. Well, there's no actually official economic growth target, however it's accepted 3 to 4%. And on the previous one when I showed you the aggregate supply chart, we had a inflation target of 2 to 3. Populations are expected to rise by 2 to 3. That's natural population through childbirth, also immigration, things like that. So if inflation's 2 to 3, population is 2 to 3, if we can aim for a target of 3 to 4, that enables the economy to cope with all these sorts of increases. And don't forget, also, it's not just when we're saying population, we're also talking about working population. A lot of you guys will be looking to get jobs next year. Even if you go to university, you'll still be looking at part-time jobs. You want the economy to still be growing at 3 to 4% so that McDonald's, Boost, whoever will continue to need jobs, want part-time jobs so that you can go to university. Okay, so sustainable economic growth describes the constraints on the growth. And that may sound strange, but remember, sustainable means not only using it now, but ensuring we can use it in the future. So it's not just a matter of just using it all up as fast as possible. We have to make it sustainable. So we want to put constraints on that growth. It must be sustainable in 3 respects. It does not threaten the inflation target of the RBA and the government, of course, that 2 to 3%. Does not lead to an external balance, such as a large current account deficit or excessive foreign debt. So we're not buying bucket loads of stuff from overseas to bring into Australia. We want to make sure that we can, use our resources and things here within Australia. And also, it does protect the environment. We're not destroying the environment. It's not like the Amazon where they're just cutting down trees. And the best example I always use for that one is the wood chipping in Tasmania, where they have certain limits. They can't just mow down trees. They have certain limits. We also have to plant regrowth forests for anything we use. Okay, so that's pretty much sustainable economic growth. Go back over and have a look at those, write your notes down, and the next one we'll be moving on to is inflation.